Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options in Play video update. So, kind of a crazy couple days, right? Yesterday, actually, a crazy couple weeks, crazy months. I mean, let's go back into the beginning of May. I mean, it's just been it's been kind of a crazy stretch we're having. Um, a lot of selling in May, some selling to start June. Then yesterday was just a crazy strong face ripping rally, and today maybe not as wild of an overall market move, but there are certainly pockets or even like individual names that are really shaping up and having some larger than anticipated moves, right? And I don't know how you all feel about Uber, whether you care about Uber or whether you have a trade on Uber. Personally, like this was one that I had been hawking, right? And we talked about this one recently, just because it's such a large IPO, and I just felt like the time when it came public, so right in the middle of May, right when a lot of the trade headlines were just starting to ratchet up, it kind of fell under the radar, which is surprising, right? Because had this been a couple months ago, this would probably have been on everybody's screen. But because of when it happened, I think a lot of people may have lost interest, lost track for whatever reason, right? Um, what what got me interested and why the trade was initially open, like the bullish call, right, was because of the IPO setup that we've talked about. So not this past option session, but the prior one, we went over the kind of the IPO setups that we screen for. So it's either, I kind of lump them into two categories, either the rip and the dip. So those are the ones that just take off running out of the gate, right? So almost like a pins. So took off running out of the gate, then the pullback, then you're watching for the pullback and like the turn, right? So I call that the rip, then the dip. Ideally, you can get involved for a turn and a retest that high, or in Uber's case, it's the opposite. It's the dip then the rip, right? So you get the initial flush, then the comeback, and then now you're looking for like the turn and the retest of the IPO high. Um, these patterns, right? They all revolve, well, for the most part, revolve around the IPO high, right? The IPO high is very significant um, because it turns into a focus area for a lot of people, especially a name like Uber, where the IPO pricing, right? It's a very substantial level. So a lot of like the trade revolved around how it handled this IPO high, which was 45 on the dot. That was the top from the day it debuted, right? So when it pulled back and it was chopping around above 40, it was percolating, right? It couldn't really get anything going. It was holding 40 nicely. It was the 8 EMA just debuted, came in, right? But we had earnings to contend with, right? Um, Earnings, can be a wild card on these new issues. You don't really know what to expect. You don't really know, um, you know, you don't really know. I mean, from a numbers wise, right? Like what the company is going to guide necessarily. Also, just from a stock movement perspective, right? There's no historical precedent, so you don't really know. I mean, the options on Uber were saying about $3, but realistically, I mean, there really wasn't any like serious gauge as to whether that was going to be a lot or a little. As it turned out, it was the options were a little bit more expensive because it didn't really come anywhere near that 3 point price to move, but it held 40, right? And then it began to turn and it's improved. And then yesterday is when uh, the quiet period ended. So you had a bunch of analyst initiations, which got momentum going, right? Once it cleared 42, which you can see was kind of an area of resistance, right? So once it cleared 42, with the help of those analyst initiations, it started to build. And then today, it really began to take off. And two key things happened today. First, it took out this pivot high, right, above 44. And then secondly, it traded through 45 on a very big pickup in volume. Right now, as I'm doing this video, it's currently hanging right at it. But that's significant because typically when these things trade back through the IPO price, they can go on runs. So this is definitely one you want to keep on your radar because if it can get through 45 and hold through 45, there's definitely well, first of all, there's really no upside like resistance areas, right? I mean, there's no historical supply on this chart. I mean, 45 was the top, and now it's like breaking into space. So that's why oftentimes when these things go to like through their IPO high, they can they can just keep running and running and running because people don't really have any there's no supply levels that necessarily come into play. For Uber, I guess what you're going to be watching is 50. It seems like 50 round number could be a pretty big target. I saw a handful of analyst initiations with targets in the 55 range. 60 in that ballpark translates to 100 billion valuation, so even that could be something to keep your eye on. But as it goes forward right now, I mean, what you're going to want to watch is to see like how the options develop, right? Because when the stock was down around 40, and in this little base, right, it's like this nice little base. It was an opportunity to get involved, and now as things start to run and people start to get interested, that's when the premiums start to get jacked up a little bit. So, the opportunity is that the dip then the rip, right? That's why I focus on like these patterns. It's like the pullback, so it's like the dip then the rip. So you want to get involved before the rip, and then for Pinterest it was like the rip then the dip. It's like you want to position for momentum. These are all about momentum. So Uber, just getting back to it, you want to see 45 hold. If it can hold above 45 and start to build, then 50 could be a nice round target to focus on. And again, typically once momentum gets going, it can play out pretty fast. So right now the July options, which I have up here, so these are about 6 weeks out, right? Pricing in about $5. So right, that would put it right at 50, give or take. I mean, it's trading at 45 as we speak, and the July straddle is pricing in about $5. So 50, obviously, that's what the July straddle saying. 50 or 40, the way momentum's shaping up, it seems like bulls are starting to get on board, so 50 could be in play. But just keep an eye on it, right? This is one I've talked about. We talk about in the VTF, and it's starting to shape up. So I definitely think it should be on your radar. Whether it was on your radar initially and you lost track of it, or if it's starting to creep back on your radar, there still could be some potential in this if it can hold above 45. So definitely do not sleep on this. All right. All right, guys. As always, I love to hear from you. So whether it's about Uber or any other trade that we're in, or even any trade that we're not in, you just want bounce an idea off me. I'd love to hear from you. Right. So definitely reach out. Have a fantastic night, and I'll talk to you guys all tomorrow.